Before American television audiences became familiar with Irene Ryan as Granny in the Beverly Hillbillies, she had already traveled a long road, one that was quiet, without glamour, and almost entirely unnoticed. The stage, touring circuits, radio, short films, and fleeting supporting roles on screen. Irene Ryan appeared quietly, disappeared quietly, working relentlessly, yet remaining outside the center of the spotlight. No major breakthrough arrived early to pull her forward. Instead, Irene's early years were built on things few could see. Experience accumulated through small roles, an ability to adapt within an ever-changing industry, and a quiet endurance strong enough to keep her from being pushed aside. She did not break through. She held on. And that persistence, over time, gradually became the foundation for everything that followed. When Irene Ryan finally stepped into the Beverly Hillbillies, it was not a transformation or an unexpected miracle. The role of Granny did not create her. It simply illuminated the person she had already become after years of quiet accumulation. Every gesture, every line delivery, every glance carried the imprint of a long journey behind it. What made Irene Ryan remain in the audience's memory was not only the laughter that Granny brought, but the sense of steadiness and familiarity in her presence, as if she had always belonged there. And behind that natural ease was a life that had passed through many years without being named, where recognition came late, yet deep enough to never fade. Irene Ryan was born on October 17, 1902, in El Paso, Texas, into a family with no connection to the arts or the stage. Her father was a military man, accustomed to discipline and constant relocation, while her mother was an Irish immigrant who carried a different cultural background, but still oriented her life towards stability within the family. There was nothing to suggest that Irene would enter the world of performance, as there was no artistic tradition in the household, nor anyone guiding her toward the stage from the beginning. The 17-year age gap between Irene and her only sister created a family structure that differed from the norm. Her sister was not just another member of the household, but, at various times, took on the role of a caretaker, even resembling a second mother. This created an environment that was both protective and slightly out of sync in terms of generational rhythm, where Irene did not entirely grow up alongside peers of her own age, but instead existed between two distances, younger than someone already grown, yet exposed early to an adult perspective. The family later moved to San Francisco, and it was there that a seemingly small detail opened the path that would follow. When Irene was about 11 years old, she entered an amateur singing contest at the Valencia Theater and chose to perform the song "Pretty Baby." It was not a grand stage or a life-changing opportunity in the conventional sense, but winning and receiving a prize of $3 created a very clear shift in how she perceived performing. For the first time, standing on stage was no longer just an experience, but something with tangible value. $3 at that time carried not only material meaning, but also a form of validation. It showed that her ability could be recognized and exchanged, that performing could become part of life rather than a fleeting moment. After this event, Irene Ryan did not make a firm decision to pursue the arts, but the stage began to appear more frequently, taking up more of her time and gradually becoming a familiar part of her daily rhythm. There was no clear transition between childhood and work. Irene did not experience a phase in which life was completely separate from responsibility or from performing in front of others. Instead, these elements gradually overlapped, making the act of being on stage a natural part of growing up. She learned to observe audience reactions, to adjust her voice, timing, and expression, not through formal training but through direct experience and repetition. It was this process that later shaped a very distinctive foundation in Irene Ryan's acting style. She did not build her skills from theory or formal schooling, but from instinct, from familiarity with the stage, and from an ability to adapt to an audience. This gave her on-screen presence a rare natural quality, as if she was not acting, but simply continuing a state that had existed in her life for a very long time. The years following her first appearance on stage at the age of 11 did not bring Irene Ryan immediate success, but instead opened a long period during which she learned how to survive in the entertainment industry from its lowest levels. She began appearing in small performances, then gradually entered vaudeville, an environment that demanded endurance more than fame, and where performers had to hold the audience through their own energy and timing. There was no guarantee of lasting success, only consecutive nights of performance and the constant pressure to keep people watching. Irene did not stand out immediately, but she adapted, observed, and gradually developed a natural stage instinct that would stay with her for decades. During this time, the first turning point did not come from a major role, but from the appearance of a partner. In 1922, Irene began performing with Tim Ryan, a comedian and writer working within the same vaudeville circuit. From their shared time on stage, a performance structure gradually took shape. The two worked in fast-paced dialogue routines, built on contrasts in personality and timing. Irene often took on energetic characters, sometimes slightly impulsive or offbeat, while Tim played the regulating role, creating just enough tension to keep the audience engaged. This chemistry was not the result of complex staging, but grew from their understanding of each other's rhythm over time. From there, the name Tim and Irene began appearing more regularly in performance programs. By the mid-1930s, as opportunities began to expand when they were invited to produce short films for educational pictures. Between 1935 and 1937, Irene Ryan and Tim Ryan appeared in 11 comedy shorts, most of which were built upon the very style they had developed on stage. This marked the first time Irene worked within a stable production system where performance was no longer limited to a live audience, but could be recorded and distributed more widely. These films helped her become more clearly recognized within the entertainment industry, while also proving that she could sustain her effectiveness not only on stage, but on screen as well. However, this same period also revealed a limitation that Irene Ryan had not yet been able to overcome. The recognition she achieved was largely tied to the structure of a duo performance, where appeal was created through the interaction between two people rather than the independent identity of each individual. Despite appearing regularly and working continuously, she had not yet built a distinct personal image strong enough to stand apart from that format. As a result, her career developed in a steady but not breakthrough direction. With each new opportunity still remaining within the familiar framework she already knew how to navigate. The year 1936 marked a notable step forward when Irene Ryan and Tim Ryan joined the radio program The Jell-O Summer Show on NBC, replacing a slot previously held by Jack Benny. Appearing on radio took her beyond the confines of stage and short films, expanding her reach to a nationwide audience. For the first time, Irene's voice became her primary tool, requiring her to adjust her expression to suit a medium without visual support. This transition did not immediately change her standing in the industry, but it made one thing clear. Irene Ryan had begun to move beyond the initial limitations of vaudeville into a larger space, where both opportunity and competition were significantly expanded. Irene Ryan's path did not unfold as a clear sequence of upward steps, but rather accumulated gradually through years of continuous work. She had stood on stage, appeared on screen, and taken part in national radio programs. Yet each of these shifts was still not enough to bring her into a prominent position. What she achieved did not lie in a single moment of breakthrough, but in her ability to continue existing and maintaining work within an ever-changing industry. At the same time, the performance landscape itself was shifting. The vaudeville stages that had once been familiar were gradually shrinking, giving way to radio and cinema. Irene did not step away from that current, but neither did she move ahead of it. She continued working with the experience she had accumulated, enough to adapt and remain, but not enough to create a decisive change in how she was perceived. Around 1942, when she began touring with Bob Hope, Irene entered a performance system far larger in scale than anything she had previously experienced. These tours were not merely performances, but part of an entertainment machine serving both the military and the public during wartime, where the pace of work was intense and the demand for performance efficiency was paramount. Within that environment, Irene was not the center, but she was part of a smoothly functioning structure where each performer had to maintain their exact position. At the same time, her participation in Bob Hope's radio program for approximately 2 years required her to alter how she existed on stage, no longer relying on physical presence or direct interaction, but creating impact through voice and timing alone. It was a necessary adaptation, but it also showed that she was moving with the current of the industry rather than leading it. Alongside radio, Irene Ryan began appearing more frequently in film, though in a very consistent way. She was assigned roles with clear functions, but rarely ones that were decisive. In 1943, she appeared in RKO short films, often cast as a wife or supporting character, where the personality was defined enough for audiences to recognize, but not enough to alter the direction of the story. That same year, she appeared in Oh, My Darling Clementine, continuing to expand her presence on screen, yet still within roles that did not place her at the center. When Monogram Pictures cast her in 4 films between 1943 and 1944, Irene's workload became denser, but it also revealed a reality. She was becoming a reliable actress within a fast production system where stability was valued over individuality and where fulfilling a role effectively mattered more than creating a defining mark that could shift her position within the broader narrative. After the war, from around 1945 to the early 1950s, Irene Ryan continued to appear regularly in numerous films. Works such as My Dear Secretary, 1948, Mighty Joe Young, 1949, and Bonzo Goes to College, 1952, kept her within the flow of the industry, but did not change her position within it. The characters she portrayed often shared familiar traits, somewhat strict or tense women, or roles designed to provide light comedic rhythm to balance the tone of a story. These were not roles constructed to shine, but necessary components within a larger structure, and Irene fulfilled them with such consistency that she almost became the default choice for this type of character. That consistency gradually became a clear limitation in her career. Irene Ryan did not lack work, was not pushed out of the industry, and did not face long periods of absence like many other performers. Yet she also did not have the opportunity to break free from the mold that had been formed around her. What she did best, precise timing and the ability to support, became the very reason she continued to be cast in similar roles, creating a cycle that was difficult to break. She was not in a position to choose her roles, but rather in a position where she was chosen to fill the spaces the system needed. After years of steady work in film, Irene Ryan's pace of appearances began to slow in the early 1950s in a way that was not immediately obvious. From around 1953 to 1954, she had almost no significant roles, not because she had left the industry, but because opportunities were gradually narrowing within a system that was changing. Cinema was no longer a space that easily made room for familiar supporting actors, and faces like Irene, despite their experience, were not among those prioritized for major projects. Gaps began to appear between her jobs, not long enough to become a complete interruption, but enough to create a sense of stagnation in a journey that had already stretched over many years without a clear turning point. As television began to expand rapidly in the mid-1950s, Irene Ryan moved into this new medium as a way to maintain her presence. In 1955, she appeared in The Danny Thomas Show, marking her first step into the sitcom format, where pacing was faster and role structures more compact than in film. In the years that followed, she continued to appear in programs such as The Real McCoys, 1959, and My Three Sons, 1962, but mostly in guest roles, appearing in one or a few episodes before leaving. This pattern of appearances clearly reflected Irene Ryan's position during that period. She was not lacking in ability, nor was she entirely pushed out of the industry, but she did not have a stable role strong enough to keep her in any one program for long. Each appearance was a short-term opportunity, followed by a return to waiting for the next role. Television offered her a new path, but not yet a secure direction, as everything remained at the level of experimentation without forming a clearly defined place for her. Her career at this point showed no dramatic shift. Irene Ryan continued to work, continued to appear, but did not move any closer to a role that could hold her in the audience's memory in a lasting way. What she had accumulated over the years was still there, but had not yet transformed into a new step forward. It as if she were standing within a system that had changed, trying to adapt without yet finding a position that truly belonged to her. The year 1962 came to Irene Ryan in much the same way as before. Another audition among the many opportunities she had grown accustomed to facing after years in the profession. When the Beverly Hillbillies began preparing for production, the role of Daisy Granny Moses was not built around her, and in the initial list of choices, her name was not at the center. Irene entered that room with everything she had: experience, endurance, and a working rhythm repeated so many times that it no longer carried any particular expectation. Yet this time, her approach to the role did not carry the hesitation often seen in auditions, but instead felt like a natural continuation of everything she had accumulated before. Irene did not try multiple variations to search for the character, nor did she adjust herself according to the reactions of those observing in the room. She entered with an image already clearly structured: her hair tightly pinned, a grounded stance, a controlled physical rhythm, and a reaction speed sharp enough to keep each line from falling out of flow. The smaller elements, the way she emphasized a word, the pause between two lines, the subtle shift in her gaze, did not exist separately, but operated as part of a system long since refined. It was precisely this continuity that made the audition unfold differently from the usual process. And there were not many repetitions nor prolonged adjustments to compare different approaches. According to backstage accounts, the production team's response came almost immediately, not because they had found a suitable actress, but because they recognized that the character had appeared before them in a form that was concrete, defined, and difficult to replace. After many years of working within predefined roles, this became a rare moment when Irene Ryan no longer had to fit herself into an existing mold. Instead, it was her rhythm, her experience, and the way she held the character that shifted the choice in her favor. What had once merely allowed her to maintain a presence in the industry no longer stood as separate elements, but converged into a single point, where everything, from vaudeville stage to radio to film, emerged at once within a single role. And from that audition onward, Irene's place in the story no longer existed at the edge of replaceable options. It began to take on a clearer shape, as if the entire long road before had not only been accumulation but had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself as something that could no longer be repeated in the same way. When the Beverly Hillbillies began airing, Irene Ryan was no longer in the position of an actress waiting for opportunities, but became a central part of a program that quickly gained strong appeal with American television audiences. From 1962 to 1971, she appeared in all 274 episodes of the series, maintaining a level of consistency that was rarely seen, where the character of Granny not only existed throughout, but also became a clear point of recognition for the show. In an industry that constantly changes faces and trends, the fact that a character could hold that position for nearly a decade showed that Irene had not only found the right role, but had also sustained it over time. The audience's reception quickly translated into formal recognition when she received 2 Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actress in a comedy series in 1963 and 1964. These nominations did not only acknowledge the effectiveness of her performance, but also reflected her position within a show that was among the most widely watched at the time. The character of Granny, with her quick reactions, distinct personality, and precise timing, was no longer a supporting role, but became an inseparable part of the series' structure. Alongside television, Irene Ryan also expanded her performance activities beyond the studio. In 1965, she signed a performance contract at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas, marking a shift outside the television framework she had been associated with in previous years. And the performance space there differed from a sitcom set. There were no edits, no multiple takes. Everything unfolded live before an audience, with a continuous pace and the requirement to maintain stable energy throughout the show. Her appearance at the Sahara demonstrated that Irene Ryan's image had become recognizable enough to exist beyond a specific role. Audiences did not come only to see a character from the screen, but to witness how she maintained her performance rhythm in a different environment, where every reaction occurred in real time. In that setting, the skills she had developed from earlier stage work, control of timing, responsiveness to the audience, and consistency in holding a role, continued in a more direct form. In 1966, Irene Ryan appeared on the big screen in Don't Worry, We'll Think of a Title, continuing to maintain her presence outside the boundaries of television. The film was structured as light comedy, where characters operated at a quick pace and depended more on interactions between roles than on deep individual development. Now, within that structure, Irene Ryan's role was not designed to create a new direction for her image, but rather to retain elements already familiar to audiences. This appearance showed that even outside sitcoms, she was still perceived within a certain range, where stability and her ability to sustain comedic rhythm continued to be utilized more than transformation or experimentation. However, that very stability and success gradually created a new limitation. The character of Granny became so closely tied to Irene Ryan that every subsequent appearance was viewed through that image. What had once been a breakthrough that defined her place in the industry now became a frame difficult to separate from, as opportunities to explore different types of roles became more limited. When the Beverly Hillbillies ended in 1971, Irene Ryan stepped away from a working rhythm that had lasted nearly a decade, where the role of Granny had become almost inseparable from her image. The gap that followed was not only the end of a television program, but also a moment that forced her to confront a familiar question in the industry. What remains when an iconic role no longer continues? For many actors, this is often a point of stagnation, where a career begins to recede behind what has already been achieved. But in 1972, Irene Ryan appeared on the Broadway stage in the musical Pippin, a production directed by Bob Fosse. Known for staging that demanded high precision in movement, rhythm, and control of stage energy. She took on the role of Berta, an older character who was far from static, appearing with a strong life force, blending humor, experience, and a kind of energy almost opposite to the granny image that television audiences had known for nearly a decade. This role did not rely on what audiences had previously been familiar with. It required the performer to be fully present in every moment, singing, acting, and maintaining rhythm within a tightly controlled stage structure under the director's vision. In the production, Irene Ryan performed the song "No Time at All," a number that was not only a performance piece, but also an emotional highlight of the entire story. On stage, she moved across layers of performance, interacted directly with fellow actors and the audience, and sustained continuous energy in an environment that did not allow for editing or correction like television. What stood out was not simply that she could complete the role, but the way she commanded that space: precise timing, flexible stage responsiveness, and the ability to hold the audience's attention without relying on the familiar elements that had once defined her success. What had been formed during her vaudeville years, where everything happened live and without the chance to repeat, seemed to return fully in the way she carried this role. The role of Bertha was not merely a return after leaving television, but a clear test of Irene Ryan's professional foundation. At an age when many actors had already begun to scale back their activities, she stepped onto a stage that demanded high intensity, where every deviation was immediately visible. And rather than simply existing within that structure, she became part of what sustained its rhythm, showing that the experience she had accumulated over decades not only allowed her to continue working, but remained strong enough to meet the rigorous demands of an entirely different performance environment. The reception of that performance quickly turned into formal recognition when Irene Ryan was nominated for a Tony Award in 1973 for Best Featured Actress in a Musical. Now, this nomination was not only a personal achievement in the later stage of her career, but also a confirmation that what she had built since her vaudeville years had never disappeared. After many years tied to an iconic television role, Irene once again demonstrated that her stage foundation still held its full value, enough to bring her back into a different performance space with the same level of presence. Yet the way she sustained her work over the years also revealed a consistent characteristic throughout her entire journey. The boundary between her profession and her private life was never clearly separated. The important relationships in Irene Ryan's life did not form outside of her work, but emerged directly within the performance environment she had been connected to from a very early stage. When she married Tim Ryan in 1922, it was not only a personal choice, but a natural continuation of a relationship that had been nurtured within the same working rhythm. They stood on stage together, built routines together, repeated dialogue before audiences together, and gradually being together was no longer a separate decision, but became part of the work itself. In the early years, that relationship gave them a rare sense of stability within an ever-changing environment. They were not only husband and wife, but also performers who appeared together, built acts together, and maintained the rhythm of each performance. Each understood how the other responded, understood pauses, timing, and even what did not need to be spoken. Over time, that coordination became so natural that it was difficult to separate, as being together was no longer an independent choice, but almost completely aligned with their daily work. Within that context, Irene did not need to define herself as an independent individual. Her presence was always tied to Tim, not only in how they appeared before audiences, but also in the rhythm of life beyond the stage. Yet this long-standing connection gradually revealed a kind of absence. Not a clear conflict, but a lack of personal space where each person could exist outside of work and outside of familiar roles. As the performance environment began to shift in the late 1930s and early 1940s, what had once held them together no longer remained intact. The work no longer functioned in the same way, and as their shared rhythm began to fall out of sync, The relationship that had been sustained by that partnership gradually lost its original foundation. The marriage ended in 1942 without dramatic stories or widely recorded incidents, but that ending brought a clear change in how Irene existed. She was not only leaving a personal relationship, but also stepping away from a period that had shaped nearly 2 decades of her adult life. For the first time, she had to stand alone in both her work and her personal life, without a partner to share performance rhythm, and without a familiar point of support after the stage lights went out. Throughout that period, there were no children born, no family formed in the traditional sense. When the relationship ended, there was nothing that continued to exist to preserve a part of it in her later life, leaving a void that did not stop at the end of a marriage, but extended into a state that was not replaced by any other form of connection. 4 years later, in 1946, Irene Ryan entered another marriage with Harold E. Knox, a man working in film production. This relationship took place in a different context, as she was no longer within the vaudeville environment and no longer tied her work and personal life together in the same way as before. On the surface, this was a more stable marriage, lasting 15 years, without the direct pressure of working together as in her previous relationship. Yet that very separation also made it less visible in what has been recorded about her life. There is little information about specific changes, no clear signs that it created a decisive shift in Irene's direction, and once again, no children appeared during this period. The duration of the second marriage did not mean it provided a lasting foundation. When it ended in 1961, Irene Ryan once again returned to living alone, but this time, there was no further stage of family life that followed. After nearly 40 years and 2 marriages, both had ended, and neither left behind a family structure that continued afterward. There were no children, no new relationship recorded, no continuation beyond the work she continued to pursue. Irene Ryan's emotional life was not marked by major dramatic events, but by the way, everything closed quietly. There were no scandals, no stories retold as shocks to the public. Yet when all these pieces are placed along a single timeline, a pattern gradually emerges. Relationships that began in close connection lasted for many years and then ended without leaving anything that continued to exist in the life that followed. The absence of children was not a minor detail, but became a defining factor in how her life continued. When relationships ended, there was no family to return to. No other role to replace what had been lost. What remained was work, roles, stages, programs, continuing to fill the time that her personal life no longer held as before. And in a very natural way, as her career gradually became the only place where Irene Ryan maintained a form of stability, while her personal life did not move in the same direction. Irene Ryan's romantic story did not produce easily visible climaxes, but left behind a prolonged emptiness, where the repetition of the same ending became clearer than any dramatic event. 2 marriages, 2 beginnings and 2 endings, no children, no family that remained until the end of her life. All of it did not unfold as an explosive tragedy, but as a quiet line running parallel to her career. And while the public remembered Irene Ryan through roles that had become iconic, that private life remained in the background, unspoken, yet clear enough to become an inseparable part of her overall journey. At that point, her work continued in its familiar rhythm. In the early months of 1973, Irene Ryan maintained her performance schedule on the Broadway stage with Pippin, where she played Berta in an environment that demanded high intensity and continuous presence. Each night, she stepped onto the stage within a tightly structured production under the direction of Bob Fosse, moving according to predetermined rhythms, maintaining dialogue, pacing, and energy throughout the performance. At the age of 70, sustaining such a regular performance schedule was no longer something taken for granted. Yet Irene maintained stability in the way she carried the role, as if her body and professional habits had long been accustomed to that rhythm. On March 10, 1973, Irene Ryan was still on the Broadway stage in Pippin, yet still holding the rhythm of performance as she had done for decades before. There were no clear warning signs that this would be a different performance, no moment suggesting that her familiar rhythm of life was about to be interrupted. But in the middle of the lights, in the midst of a scene still unfolding, her body suddenly could no longer maintain the control it once had. The interruption occurred in the very space she had been tied to her entire life. Not backstage, but in front of the audience following her every movement. From the stage, Irene was taken away under medical direction. What began as a sudden stroke quickly led to deeper examinations, and the results left little room for hope. A malignant brain tumor, glioblastoma, inoperable. That diagnosis was not only a medical conclusion, but a clear boundary set upon the time that remained. From that point forward, everything moved in a direction that could not be reversed, as the body that had once allowed her to maintain precise performance rhythms gradually moved beyond the control she had relied on her entire life. The days that followed were no longer tied to performance schedules or upcoming shows. There were no stage lights, no audience. Only the space of a hospital in Santa Monica, where time was measured by the progression of the illness. Irene Ryan did not return to Pippin, and the role she had just brought to the stage ended at the very moment she stepped away from it. The distance between the two worlds, the stage and the hospital, did not stretch out, but collapsed quickly, as if everything had been shortened into a span too brief to prepare for an ending. On April 26, 1973, Irene Ryan passed away at the age of 70. There was no clearly defined withdrawal, no extended period to gradually close her career. The last moment the public knew of her was still tied to performance. She was still a person standing in the light, holding her role within a story that was still unfolding. And then, within that very space, everything stopped. A life bound to the stage and the screen came to an end while still within its rhythm. Not separated from it, not standing outside it, but stopping at the very place that had shaped the entire journey. Irene Ryan is remembered through an image that has settled deeply into the audience's memory, in a way tied to time itself. An image that does not need to be named or repeatedly recalled, yet remains. I like something familiar in memory that people hold without even realizing when it began. The way she existed on screen and on stage was built from very small details. A reaction that landed at the right moment. A pause held just long enough. A glance capable of shifting the tone of an entire situation. All of these accumulated over time, forming a presence that was steady, quiet, yet unmistakable. The consistency in her timing and the way she maintained a coherent image over many years allowed audiences to recognize her through a sense of familiarity, repeated often enough to become something natural in the way they remembered her. What remains is tied to a period when characters could accompany audiences over long stretches of time, maintaining their form and rhythm, and Irene Ryan existed within that space, blending into it, making her presence feel close and recognizable without needing to create distance. When she was no longer there, that image still remained in a quiet way, existing as something familiar in memory, without needing to be named, without needing to be recalled. Irene Ryan's life moved in that same rhythm, not through clear leaps, but through accumulation across extended periods, where each change came slowly and did not always produce immediate results. From small stages to unstable roles and then gradually becoming a recognizable image, that journey was not driven by early major opportunities, but by persistence sustained over many years. But even after finding a role strong enough to define her image, limitations continued to exist. And what she retained was not constant transformation, but a steady presence within an industry that was always shifting. In the end, the image that remains cannot be separated from the way she worked. Standing in the light, holding her role until the final moment, without withdrawing in a separate way. That life does not leave behind a complete answer to what closed in her private world, nor does it attempt to clarify the gaps that existed for many years. Within that incompleteness, one thing remains: a way of existing steady enough not to be erased as everything else changes. What do you think about a life that unfolds in this way, where what remains is not what was achieved, but how a person holds themselves within the flow of time?